Does Monday at the office feel like a storm? Not with Microsoft Copilot. That feeling when Copilot gets everyone up to speed instantly? It's sunny again. When Copilot simplifies complex data so your teams can act, that sun's shining on a beach. And when Copilot uncovers hidden insights, you're on that beach with your people, and you find buried treasure. That's Microsoft Copilot. Learn more at Microsoft.com/AI for all.
Today on CityCast Madison. Wisconsin now has new political maps. That's after our state Supreme Court ruled that the old GOP-drawn maps were unconstitutional. The new maps were made by Democratic Governor Evers' office and approved by the Republican legislature. So how might this change who governs Wisconsin? And what impact might this have on Madison voters this November? We asked John Johnson, research fellow in the Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education at Marquette University Law School. It's Monday, March 11th. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. John, hello.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. So we've got new voting maps, and you are one of the, if not the, most knowledgeable person about these maps in our state.
I would not go that far, but I have been studying them closely.
Yeah, but like really closely.
There are other people who know more, but so I've spent a lot of time looking at the various maps that have been proposed in Wisconsin over the last couple of years, breaking down how different election results would have happened in each one's, the communities that they keep intact or not, and the partisan consequences of all of those choices.
Tell us about these new maps. What are some of the biggest changes?
Well, they're entirely new. With the exception of the districts in the city of Milwaukee, this is an entirely new map. There's really pretty high odds that you're in a different district than you used to be, or even if you're in the same district that you used to be, that the incumbent who represented you is no longer in that district. And the new map is drawn in such a way that for the first time in more than a decade, if Democrats win a majority of the vote in races for state assembly, they will probably actually win a majority of the state assembly.
Wow, that's a big deal.
It's an enormous change from the past few cycles.
Yeah, so talk about Madison area. How did our maps change?
Madison is where the Democrats who drew the new map were able to gain the most seats. So there were about 11 Democratic-leaning districts in the greater Madison area, the whole sort of south central part of the state, stretching all the way down to Beloit. And under the new version, there's 16. And those were largely drawn by, rather than kind of packing Democratic voters tightly into a set of very Democratic seats, the new map creates a set of districts that pair more Democratic parts of Dane County or even the city of Madison with more competitive or Republican-leaning areas further afield. So for instance, the new version of the 48th district comes all the way into just about Stoughton Road out by the airport, and then ultimately stretches all the way out to Columbus to the northeast of there. So you get some funny shaped districts in order to pull that off.
Interesting. And I feel like are you saying that some of these districts that were maybe more urban, like include some of the rural areas that were not included in the first or the recent maps that were tossed out?
That's right. Yeah. So to create those additional Democratic leaning seats, the map drawers paired more urban Democratic voters with more rural Republican areas, being careful to do so in a way where the Democratic voters still had a majority. So you see a bunch of seats that are around 55% Democratic instead of a smaller number of seats where many were, 65% Democratic, for instance.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I feel like one of the things that needs to be said is that gerrymandering in and of itself isn't illegal. Giving yourself an advantage isn't illegal. And that's not why the maps were tossed out, or the official reason was it was around the fact that there were some districts that weren't contiguous. They weren't connected pieces of land.
Yes, many people suddenly found a deep passion for the strict definition of contiguity. Yes. If you go back to the 1990s, the parties had directly opposite views about whether or not the Constitution should be interpreted to literally mean contiguity or not. It's purely a function of the partisan advantage each side was seeking.
Right. I mean, it's like which day, depending on how it benefits you. But it was surprising to me at first. I think like, oh, they're gerrymandered. They must be bad. But gerrymandering in and of itself is not illegal. But we had one of the most extreme partisan gerrymanders in our nation's history. And that's still not why the maps are tossed out. Can you talk about how now with these new maps, how less partisan they may have become?
Yeah, so the situation now is that whichever party wins a majority of the vote in state assembly races will probably win a majority of the state assembly. And the same is true for the state senate, although it will take 2 cycles for that to take effect since we elect about half of state senators in any given year. So you can think about it this way. Under the old maps, Democrats needed to be as popular as Tammy Baldwin was in 2018 in order to have a shot at winning a majority in the state assembly.
That's pretty popular.
Tammy Baldwin won this. She won the state by about 11 points, kind of the high watermark for any partisan politician in Wisconsin in recent memory. And under this map, Democrats could be a little less popular than Tony Evers was 2 years ago and still win a majority in the state assembly.
Speaking as a layman, as much as I literally adore geography, I am not that informed in terms of political maps to the degree that you are. Are the new maps free of political gerrymandering, or is there still plenty of that baked in?
Gerrymandering is a tricky word to use because people mean different things by it. Sometimes people mean gerrymandering to mean that one party has drawn maps to make it likely that they will win a majority of the seats without a majority of the votes. Other people mean gerrymandering is when a party simply thinks about partisanship a lot when they're drawing the map rather than using these neutral criteria. This is a map that Democrats drew thinking about partisanship a lot, because if you drew a map without using partisanship, without thinking about it at all, just using neutral criteria of compactness and keeping municipalities and counties intact, you would end up drawing a map that benefits Republicans quite considerably. It would be a map similar to the one that the conservative law firm Will submitted to the Supreme Court that would have drawn, somewhere in the low 40s number of Democratic-leaning seats. So the Supreme Court, in their ruling that threw out the old map, said that they wanted the parties submitting maps to the court to explicitly consider the partisan impact of those plans. They were looking for a map that would come close to achieving what some people call majoritarian concordance, or this idea that whichever party receives the most votes should also probably win a majority of the legislative seats, which, has some real intuitive appeal. And many people would say, well, how could something that does that be gerrymandering? My point is that the word can be defined different ways.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to hear about how the maps will likely change our elections this fall. Dems had their shot, and we went with the Evers maps. How might it impact the balance of power in our state house?
Well, Democrats are going to win a lot more seats. They will sort of right out of the gate, win at least 10 more seats, I think, in the assembly. And then there will be a set of competitive seats that could potentially get them to a 50-seat, actual majority in the state assembly if they have a good year. In the state senate, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion that Republicans will lose their supermajority, their 1-seat supermajority that they currently have in the state senate, which takes away their impeachment ability. Though it's equally unlikely that Democrats would win a majority of the state senate in November. It's likely that control of the state senate will be up for grabs in 2026, but not in 2024.
Shipping can make or break a sale, so optimize how you ship your orders with ShipStation. They make it easy to automate and manage orders no matter how big your business grows. And they might even be able to help reduce shipping and warehouse costs. So optimize and keep up your momentum for growth with ShipStation. Sign up for your free 60-day trial now at ShipStation.com and use the code POD. That's ShipStation.com with the code POD.
How did Republicans in the legislature agree to Governor Evers' map proposal in the first place? I did a little research and knew that it seems like it was more of a conservative offering compared to some of the other maps that were submitted.
Slightly so, yes. So there were 4 Democratic-aligned plans before the court, and I think Republicans were nervous that the court would pick one that was even worse for Republicans than the Evers proposal. In terms of seat lean, depending on how you measure it, the Evers map is slightly better for Republicans. It's not a huge difference, but it's a little bit better. It pairs a few fewer Republican incumbents than some of the other plans. But I think the biggest reason that Republicans probably preferred Evers' map is that it really takes the possibility of Democrats winning a trifecta in November off the table. So there was one of the proposals before the Supreme Court, the one submitted by the right petitioners, which deliberately drew so many potentially Democratic-leaning Senate seats in the even-numbered class that's up for a vote in 2024 that Democrats would have actually had a shot, kind of a long shot, but an actual shot at winning a majority of the state Senate in addition to the state assembly. I think that was the worst case outcome for Republicans, the thing they were most keen on avoiding. And accepting the Evers map at least takes that off the table.
Okay. As I've always, growing up in Wisconsin, I always thought about the state as very purple. And you heard from some of the folks, over the past few years under the old maps who are running for office who's like, I will not win. Like, it was some of the maps were so extreme. And it sounds like this has kind of brought a little bit of balance to all of that.
Yeah, although there's some subtlety there because this actually isn't a super competitive map in terms of the number of seats that are realistically competitive between both parties. It raises the Democratic floor and lowers the Republican ceiling a lot, but it doesn't dramatically increase the number of competitive seats compared to the old map. Instead, it makes who wins those competitive seats dramatically more consequential because that will actually determine which party controls the legislature rather than simply being the icing on the cake for Republicans on top of their already baked in majority. And that's in contrast to, for example, the map originally submitted by the People's Map Commission that Governor Evers put together a few years ago. That map created more competitive seats and actually used competitiveness as a specific criteria that they were looking for amongst the other criteria as they drew districts. These maps were not drawn with the competitiveness criteria in mind.
Interesting. Yeah, like you said, there's so many ways to think about gerrymandering and maps and influence. And that was just another part of the whole pie. I feel like we should note these changes will impact the state legislature, but it won't impact like the congressional seats, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the congressional seats don't have that contiguity issue that got the old maps thrown out. The state Supreme Court has in fact declined to hear alternative challenges to the congressional maps. And so the ones we've got are the ones we're going to use in November.
What surprised you most about this whole process? Because it's been, years and stories, and I'm sure you've done, tons of interviews. What is like standing out to you from all of this?
I'm not surprised by how messy and contentious it has been. If you look back at the history of redistricting in Wisconsin, that's par for the course. I actually am surprised that we saw the legislature and the governor agree on maps, even under duress, as it were. I understand the reasoning. We talked about that a few minutes ago, but this is only the second time since the modern redistricting era began in the 1960s that Democrats and Republicans have actually agreed on a map in Wisconsin. The only other time was in the 1970s, and that also came under threat from the state Supreme Court of doing something on their own. And so that was a surprise to me. I didn't expect that to happen when the court threw out the old maps just before Christmas. And I'm a little bit surprised at how many Democratic-leaning seats the various parties who submitted these plans to the court were able to come up with, while at the same time splitting some municipalities, but not splitting as many municipalities as some observers thought they'd have to in order to draw that many Democratic seats. It's an example of how even though Wisconsin's political geography does benefit Republicans because Democrats are more compacted into a few really populous cities, it's still possible to draw a map that comes close to achieving majoritarian concordance while having at least a general respect for those traditional neutral redistricting criteria.
Yeah. I'm curious about what you think about the statement I heard thrown around, like, this is politicians choosing the voters versus the voters choosing the politicians. Have you heard that? And do you feel any better?
I mean, this is still the politicians choosing the voters. This map was drawn by Democrats. So I think you could say that this is a bipartisan map in the sense that it was passed with the support of Democrats and Republicans, but it is not a nonpartisan map. And there are states that have nonpartisan processes for drawing maps. And you get different outcomes when you do that. They might pair even more incumbents than this one does, because a nonpartisan process would pay no attention to that at all. It shouldn't anyway. You might get more competitive seats that way instead of here. I think you saw, the Democrats who were drawing this map wanted to have competitive seats that would let them win control of the chamber, but they also wanted to make sure that they had a higher floor of seats that they were definitely going to win. Whereas under a nonpartisan process, you might just have a lot of genuinely competitive seats that could lead to large majorities for whichever party was most popular that year. Not what you see in this case.
I don't know. It kind of felt like our Supreme Court were the parents, and they're like, yo, you guys have to figure this out, and I'm going to give you to this date. And like you said, like, it was surprising, but they did actually come together, and there's something about a deadline.
Yeah, because the parents might have picked something even worse. I guess that was the...
Yeah, they're like, okay, quick. No, we got to,
Yeah, that is sort of what happened. There are other options. Michigan has figured out a way to do this that worked well for them in the last cycle, where they have an independent commission that politicians are banned from serving on. In fact, some of the members of that commission are chosen from people who receive random mailers from the Secretary of State inviting them to participate. They throw all the names in the hat and they draw some out. And those people are on the commission. They get to draw the maps. It's really quite a remarkable way of doing it. Missouri has a different way where they have enforced bipartisanship.
I think I've heard you talk about the Iowa model. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion of the quote unquote Iowa model in Wisconsin because at one time or another over the last few years, both parties have sort of presented what they have described as the Iowa model in the legislature. It's never been passed. And frankly, what they were putting forward wasn't the Iowa model for a reason that is a little complicated to explain. But basically in Iowa, under their constitution, if you fail to pass a state legislative map by a specific date, then under the Constitution, the state Supreme Court automatically steps in to do it. And so if you adopt the bill that Iowa has here without that constitutional provision, you actually aren't including the thing that makes the process work, which is this deadline that forces action from the legislature and the governor and then provides for a resolution if they fail to do so. That all being said, the Iowa model is still not independent redistricting. It's redistricting led by the legislature. They're just required to consider a sort of nonpartisan option before doing whatever they want.
Yeah.
There are many models, but the thing that the successful models all have in common is that they lay out exactly what should happen at every stage if the process breaks down. In Wisconsin, if the process breaks down, as it frequently does when Democrats and Republicans deadlock and we have divided government, the courts just make it up. Sometimes the federal courts do it. Sometimes the state courts do it. They make up the criteria they're going to use each time. It's really a free-for-all.
And we can't be having that. It doesn't. I don't know. Do you think this is a sign at all of just exhaustion?
This has been such a messy cycle. Part of me almost hopes that we'll get a legislature that can find some common ground on coming up with, a different way of doing it, because it's not that long from now that we're going to be talking about this again for the next cycle.
So in 5 years, are we going to be here all over again?
That's right. Sure will be.
Okay, well, but this has been very enlightening. Are there any last thoughts about this process or things that you feel like maybe aren't being talked about that are worth sharing?
So, we have our partisan primary in early August when we have the primaries for state legislative races. a lot of people don't vote in those because historically they haven't been very interesting for most people. They haven't been really contested between multiple serious candidates. That's going to be different this year, I think. There's going to be a lot of contested primaries among both Democrats and Republicans around the state. And so if you're a voter who often ignores the August primary because there's not much going on where you live, check it out this year, look up your ballot and see if there's something that's interesting to you.
Democracy in action. John, thank you so much for giving us the details about your analysis, and we really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
That's John Johnson, research fellow in the Lubar Center for Public Policy Research and Civic Education at Marquette University Law School. If you want to learn more about his map analyses, check out our show notes for a link. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with the biggest map nerd you know? We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, stay warm. Credits. I feel like I just looked at you like the way Pedro Pascal does on that video where he's like looking at the window like it is in a convertible and he's like like a dog, a little doggy. Okay.